Facing justice, ex-officer Derek Chauvin in court today, making his first appearance for the killing of George Floyd. And the growing calls in Minneapolis and across the country for police reform and, in some cases, to disband the departments entirely. President Trump weighs in on the debate today, slamming the idea, but it has been done before. We'll talk to the former city leaders who successfully overhauled their police department. Voices of the protest, hundreds of thousands of Americans taking to the streets, demanding change, even the youngest among us speaking out. New York City, the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak in the U.S., begins to reopen today. And at the original epicenter of the virus, Wuhan, China, a new study suggesting that the virus may have started spreading much sooner than first reported, and the innovative way researchers obtained that data. Losing trust as the virus takes its toll on hard-hit Brazil. Some say they rely on gangs versus their own government. The reports of how vital information is limited. And meddling with the message, the swift backlash after companies and celebrities attempt to address the protests. Is the outrage deserved, or is it cancel culture? Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. It has been said that we must live together as brothers and sisters or perish together as fools. Well, we continue to see evidence of the former in peaceful protests across the country. From suburbs to cities, we see the masses coming together as brothers and sisters. Protests that largely started because of the death of George Floyd. Today, the former police officer Derek Chauvin was in court today for the very first time. Prosecutors say that he had his knee on George Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes while Floyd went from, quote, limp to lifeless. The other three, now ex-police officers who were at the scene, have also been charged and are behind bars. What the attorney for one of them, a rookie officer, told ABC News about why he's not to blame. The calls to defund the police are growing louder, but also sparking backlash. And in the most dramatic move to date, a pledge to dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department. Will that idea catch on? ABC's Alex Perez leads us off.
Tonight, fired Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin facing murder charges, making his first appearance in court via video in an orange jumpsuit and blue face mask. The prosecutor laying out the second-degree murder case against Chauvin, saying he placed his knee on Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes as he went limp. The judge setting bail at $1.25 million. The three other officers, Toe Tao, J. Alexander King, and Thomas Lane, all charged with aiding and abetting Chauvin. Tonight, Lane's lawyer placing the blame on Chauvin, the veteran officer, saying Lane had only been on the job 4 days.
Was he afraid of Chauvin, your client?
He relied on his 20-year experienced officer. And that's why he didn't do anything. He thought that this man knew what he was doing. My client did exactly what he was supposed to do. Follow the experienced officer's advice.
Get on the ground!
Across the country, more officers accused of excessive force facing charges. In New Mexico today, a white police officer charged with involuntary manslaughter after putting his knee on the neck of a Hispanic man back in February. Prosecutors say it led to his death. In Fairfax, Virginia, a white officer arrested for assault after body camera video showed him using a stun gun on an unarmed black man, putting his knees on the man's back. The man yelling, "I can't breathe." All the officers involved now placed on administrative leave. Now, growing calls to defund or outright abolish police departments. Defunding meaning diverting some funds from police to other social programs. The controversial issue coming to a boiling point in Minneapolis, the city's mayor confronted by protesters at the site of Floyd's killing.
I know there needs to be deep-seated structural reform in terms of how the department operates. The systemically racist system needs to be revamped.
But the crowd pressing him for more answers.
We don't want no more police. Is that clear? We don't want people with guns toting around in our community, shooting us down. It is a yes or a no. Will you defund the Minneapolis Police Department?
I do not support the full abolition of the police.
The Minneapolis City Council announcing it intends to dismantle the police department, calling it beyond reform. Just moments ago, the mayor announcing a new coalition to provide more economic inclusion for people of color to help the city move forward.
George Floyd moved to Minneapolis for a fresh start. in honoring his memory and generations of Black people who have been victimized before him, we will rebuild as a stronger, more equitable, and more inclusive city.
Other cities also announcing plans to partially defund the police. New York City shifting NYPD funds to youth programs. LA cutting $150 million from its police budget.
And we are joined now live by Alex Perez. So, Alex, what do we know about those plans to dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department? How would that even work? I mean, who would keep the peace at that point?
Well, Lindsay, the short answer to that question is your guess is as good as mine. What we do know right now is that the city council says they are actively pursuing this as a realistic possibility. Now, who or what would replace the police department remains unknown. When all of this would happen remains unknown. But city council members say they're thinking about policing in a whole different way. For instance, instead of having police officers, armed police officers, respond to a call that involves a mental health issue, perhaps they would send a social worker or someone who with expertise in mental health would respond to those calls. Those are the things that they're thinking about, and they say that's what they want to look forward to as they sort of plan all of this right now. The one thing that is certain is that there will be a lot of long debate on this in the weeks and months ahead. Lindsay?
That is to be sure. And as we saw in your report, you spoke to the attorney for Thomas Lane, the rookie ex-officer who's now claiming that he was just following Chauvin's lead. What else did his attorney tell you?
Yeah, you know, that attorney, his name is Earl Gray, and he repeated to us several times that his client, Thomas Lane, the former officer, feels that Derek Chauvin should be the one to blame in this case. He said that Chauvin was actually a trainer. He trained these two rookie officers in the past, and that when he arrived in the scene, according to this attorney, that these younger officers, it is routine for them to allow the older veteran officer on the scene to sort of handle the case, and he says that's what he did. He also wanted to point out and repeated to us several times that Officer Thomas Lane, he says, said on 2 occasions, let's turn him over, referring to George Floyd when he was gasping for air. But he says that Chauvin said no when he was asked to do that by these other officers. He also told us that his client, Thomas Lane, was near George Floyd's feet. George Floyd, by all accounts, according to family members, was a very tall man, about 6'6". He says his client, Thomas Lane, didn't quite know what was happening from down below by George Floyd's feet to over by his head, where his neck was, where he was gasping for air. He also wanted to make sure that people know that Thomas Lane got in the ambulance and performed CPR on George Floyd, but as we all know now, none of that was enough because George Floyd died.
Alex
Lindsay?
Perez, thank you again so much for your reporting. And thousands of people lined up in Houston to pay their respects to George Floyd. Many people waited for hours in line before being let in, wearing masks and socially distancing. ABC's Marcus Moore was there and joins us now with more. Marcus, clearly a lot of people showed up who didn't know George Floyd personally. What did they tell you about their rationale for why they felt they needed to be there today?
Well, you know, Lindsay, the people we talked to said they just felt like it was important to be here and to pay their respects. And as you mentioned, they didn't know George Floyd personally. They only heard his name on television. Most of them didn't know him, but they still feel or felt that connection and that this was their opportunity to pay their respects. And we saw people, Lindsay, of all walks of life, black, white, young, old, but someone who really stood out to me today outside the church was a man by the name of Don Murray, and he is a white man who showed up here because he said that it was on his heart. He remembered having arguments with his dad and relatives who he said were racist. And because of that, he wanted to be here, and he hoped that his relatives, his uncles and his sisters would see him at this event, at this service, this emotional service, and that he still has hope that they would learn that racism is wrong. And that was, Lindsay, one person we met that really stuck out to me amidst the thousands who we've seen streaming into the church here in Houston to view George Floyd in this open casket.
Also there in Houston, former Vice President Joe Biden, he showed up to meet with the Floyd family today. Do we have any sense of what their conversation entailed?
We obviously we weren't allowed into that conversation. It was a private one, but it went on for well over an hour. We know that the former vice president, did meet with Gianna, one of George Floyd's daughters, and we heard from a family attorney, Benjamin Crump, that the meeting was a good one, and that he shared in their pain that they're feeling right now, and that he showed compassion. So we know that this meeting meant a whole lot. It meant a lot to the family as they look to tomorrow, another emotional day that they have ahead.
Right, there have been several memorial services, but we know that the funeral is tomorrow. What do we know about the funeral schedule for tomorrow?
The funeral, Lindsay, will be a private one. It will just be the family and close friends, people who grew up with George Floyd here in the 3rd Ward of Houston, and that the burial will take place, and that he will be buried next to his mother. And one of the things that we have certainly got a sense of is that Houston was his home, and that people here want George to be remembered as a good man as they get ready to say goodbye, and they wrap their arms around his family tomorrow. Really
poignant that he's going to be buried next to his mother, as we all saw as he called out to Mama as he was taking his last breaths. Okay, Marcus Moore, thank you so much. And we should also note that the Floyd funeral is set for tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, and we will, of course, have full coverage for you right here on ABC News Live. Now to Washington, Democratic members of Congress draped in kente cloth took a knee for 8 minutes and 46 seconds today before unveiling legislation to reform policing. Meantime, at the White House, President Trump held a roundtable with law enforcement saying there will be no defunding or disbanding of police. Here's ABC Chief White House correspondent Jonathan Karl.
Sensing a political opportunity in the growing protests around the country, the president pounced on activist calls to defund the police.
There won't be defunding, there won't be dismantling of our police, and there's not going to be any disbanding of our police. Our police have been letting us live in peace.
The president also said he's considering ideas for police reform, but he didn't mention specifics.
We're going to work, and we're going to talk about ideas how we can do it better and how we can do it, if possible, in a much more gentle fashion.
His attorney general today acknowledged African-American distrust of the criminal justice system, but 24 hours ago, Bill Barr said he does not think there is systemic racism.
I think there's racism in the United States still, but I don't think that the law enforcement system is systemically racist.
Joe Biden has expressed solidarity with the protesters, but today his campaign made it clear he doesn't support calls for defunding either. Vice President Biden does not believe that police should be defunded, the campaign said in a written statement. House Democrats unveiled their own reform plan today, calling for, among other things, a ban on chokeholds, a national registry of police misconduct, and limiting immunity protections for police officers. One thing not in the Democratic proposal, anything to do with defunding the police.
Funding of police is a local matter, as you know. From the standpoint of our legislation, we're not going to that place.
Republican leaders have said they, too, support reforms, but they have not signed on to this bill. Senator Mitt Romney made a show of support for the protests over the weekend.
We need to stand up and say that Black Lives Matter.
And Jonathan Karl joins us now from Washington. John, this all comes as a series of new polls show that Joe Biden has a growing lead over President Trump.
Well, the polling has been downright grim for the Trump campaign. The new national poll out today from CNN actually has Joe Biden with a 14-point lead. We've also seen a whole lot of state polling that shows the president trailing in many of the key battleground states that he needs to win re-election. Of course, Donald Trump has seen bad polls before and gone on to win. He's also out there saying that these polls are skewed, and he says that the media organizations that have put them out are actually doing them to try to dampen the enthusiasm of his supporters. But this is pretty consistent across the board. It's not just CNN polls, for instance. There's been some grim polls from Fox News as well.
And John, also word late today that the president is planning to restart in-person campaign rallies.
That's what we're hearing from the campaign. They say within 2 weeks, Lindsay, that he'll be out holding these rallies. And not only that, they're predicting that they will be a lot of enthusiasm, and big crowds. So they're predicting big crowds despite the continuing threat of COVID-19.
All right, Jonathan Karl from the White House for us. Thanks so much, John.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Minneapolis will not be the first city to attempt to disband its police department. The city of Camden, just over the river from Philadelphia, took drastic action back in 2013, dissolving the police department and entering into a policing agreement with the county focused on community policing. At that time, Camden was one of the most dangerous cities in America and had a crime rate worse than some third world countries. Murders in the city of 74,000 people reached 67 in 2012. That number dropped to 25 in 2019. And joining us now, former Camden Mayor Dana Redd and current Camden County Executive Lou Capelli Jr. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Now, the two of you helped implement these reforms 7 years ago when a lack of money forced you to get creative. Dana, let's start with you. Walk us through what you did and why it was so important for Camden.
Yes, absolutely. Well, as you stated, you put this in context in that, the Camden County Police Department was really born out of our fiscal crisis and our public safety crisis, and not as a result of police brutality. Back in 2010, 2011, we were faced with a budget deficit, and it forced us to look for partnerships and to explore innovative solutions in order to provide for public safety for our citizens. And so working with the County of Camden and the state of New Jersey under then Governor Christie, we were able to develop a Camden County Police Department under the direction of Lou Capelli. And what's important to highlight is that we engaged the community throughout the entire process. So we communicated with them from the very beginning, listening to their concerns, their ideas, and in particular, the type of community policing that they wanted to see in the city of Camden.
And Lou, you were charged with helping to implement this, and I understand that you went directly to the community for input and urged officers to get out and meet their community, changing completely how policing was done. How did that work?
Well, going back to quickly what Dana said, we asked members of the community what they were looking for in police officers. And we took some of those characteristics and made it part of a job description for our potential police officers. Then they were trained in de-escalation. They were trained in community relations. And the first thing they do, the very first day they hit the streets in Camden, is they knock on the doors on the neighborhoods in which they are serving, introduce themselves, and let the residents know that they're there to help. They can call them at any time, communicate with them. And what we've been doing throughout these years is building a trust with the residents of the city, which has really been key to reducing the crime rate in the city.
And Dana, I'd go back to you. Police departments from around the world have reached out over the years to learn from Camden as far as what you all have done so effectively there. If the mayor of Minneapolis were to call you up and ask for advice, what would you tell him? Because, he now has protesters demanding that he support defunding of the police, or they're saying that they will not vote him back into office. So how would you recommend that he respond?
Well, peer-to-peer learning exchanges are really key and crucial during these times. And I can tell you that very early on, Camden was able to engage with our peers in Philadelphia and Chicago to learn from their experiences and to bring their experience here, but customize our model for Camden. A leader is charged and tasked with making difficult decisions in difficult times. I think for the mayor, he needs to focus on what is the right thing to do for the city that has elected him to lead during these extraordinary times. And those solutions may not be easy to digest, but necessary in order to provide for the public safety, but also to respond to the citizens. I think he should listen, because Lou and I both were good listeners throughout the process. And in listening, you may even hear an idea that can be implemented and engaged that comes from the community.
And Lou, it sounded like you wanted to respond to that as well.
Yeah, so we view our police officers as guardians, not warriors. And we view them as true partners with the residents. We have everything from pop-up block parties to free ice cream for kids, athletic activities with kids, because we want to build that trust early on in our residents. That way, when there is an issue, they can come to us, feel free to speak to us, and view us again as guardians and not as warriors.
I love that. Guardians, not warriors. And Lou, you've been county executive throughout this entire time. Former President Obama has singled out Camden as a success story and also praised police for demonstrating peacefully with community members these past couple of weeks. Are you proud of what the city and county has accomplished? And what would you suggest if there's one point that other cities and counties across this country could take? What would you say it should be from Camden?
Yeah, we're very proud of our police department and of our residents. They've just been spectacular through this process. And the number one word of advice I would give is gain the trust of your residents.
And finally, Dana, what's the biggest lesson that you'd say that you've learned in all of this? And do you think that more police departments will follow in the steps of Camden and now in Minneapolis?
So, just to build upon what Lou has already said, gaining the public's trust in the policing strategy and also making them a part of the solutions and implementing those solutions, I think is really key and critical to the success of a public safety strategy in cities such as Camden and other urban communities across this nation.
Guardians, not warriors. I think that's the message that everyone will take from talking to both of you today. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now to the coronavirus pandemic. Here in New York City, as many as 400,000 people return to their jobs in some fashion as the city begins phase 1 of reopening for non-essential workers. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo took the 7 train to his Manhattan office today. Overall in the U.S., we are nearing 2 million confirmed cases of COVID-19, which is more than 20 times the number of reported cases in China, where the outbreak began. And there's also new research about the origins of the virus that suggests that it may have appeared first in Wuhan, China, much earlier than initially thought. Our Tom Yamas has that story.
New evidence the coronavirus may have been sweeping through Wuhan long before Chinese health officials told the world they had a problem. These satellite photos, seen here for the first time, show various Wuhan hospitals on several days in October of 2019. The clues are all those red dots. They represent cars inside packed hospital parking lots 3 months before the Chinese government announced the spread of COVID-19.
When you start pulling these images together and you see a pattern emerge, the first thing you're thinking of, there's no way that this could be possible.
Dr. John Brownstein is the lead researcher of this new study from Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard Medical School. He specializes in disease surveillance. Using images from commercially available satellites, he and his team analyzed more than 300 photos of Wuhan hospitals.
Satellite photos mirror images, October 2018, October 2019, and you see the number of cars skyrocket.
So much greater, and greater than any other sort of time period that we had looked at through multiple years.
This satellite image of Hubei Women and Children Hospital was taken in October of 2018 with 393 cars in the parking lot. A full year later, 714. At Wuhan's Tianyou Hospital, 171 cars in October of 2018, jumping to 285 in 2019. At Zhongyang Hospital, 506 to 640. And even Wuhan's smaller hospitals, like Tongji Medical Center, 112 cars in 2018 compared to 214 a year later, a 90% increase.
So more cars to a hospital, the hospital's busier, likely because maybe something's happening in the community and infection is growing and people have to see a doctor.
Researchers say they can't prove this increased activity is due to COVID-19, but they did uncover another clue when they looked at Baidu, the Google equivalent in China.
You don't only have photos, you also looked into the internet searches of what was happening in October. What did you find?
What we found is people were searching for terms related to diarrhea, which we know now is an important symptom of COVID, as well as cough. And these things were starting to increase, late summer and early fall.
Brownstein tells ABC the study also considered potential outside factors unrelated to coronavirus that could impact this spike, like mass gatherings or natural disasters.
We looked through all of this. We couldn't identify any other reason for this signal.
ABC spoke with multiple infectious disease experts who told us there is almost always a delay in identifying and then reporting an outbreak. China has adamantly maintained they reported the outbreak in a timely fashion. But their own CDC director recently told Chinese local media the novel coronavirus had existed long before it was found at the wet market in Wuhan in late December.
Our thanks to Tom for that report. ABC News did reach out to the Chinese government to ask about the Harvard study. They had no response except to point us to a paper that was issued yesterday saying that the origin of the virus requires research and it must be based on facts and evidence. And that's exactly why we now have someone who can help us out with just that. Dr. John Brownstein, Harvard professor who headed this study and also an ABC News contributor. You just saw him a moment ago in Tom's report. Doctor, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Of course, thank you.
So first off, how did you draw the correlation between the increase in traffic and possible earlier cases of the coronavirus?
Yeah, so this idea of using hospital parking lots is actually something we started years ago, where we looked at hospitals across Latin America and saw that we could actually predict the flu season just by how busy the hospitals were. So clearly there's a linkage between, an infection that's spreading and people rushing to the hospital. So we took that concept and brought it to Wuhan, where there's still this mystery about what was taking place in the fall. And here we saw hospitals getting busy, parking lots filling up, and that potentially points to some infectious disease that's spreading in the community.
I mean, it seems really smart, but some might say, well, when a big event is going on, more people are in town, that could cause a spike in hospital visits. So how were you able to eliminate possible external factors like the Wuhan military games that are held in the city?
Exactly. I mean, we had to really eliminate things like the Wuhan military games, where actually our images came well before that. So the increases were already taking place. We looked at natural disasters. We looked at other factors that could influence the signals that we saw. And sort of nothing was bubbling to the surface other than this potential infectious disease that was potentially spreading.
And your team mostly relied on those satellite images for this study, but you also uncovered some trends on social media. What did you find there?
Yeah, exactly. So, of course, we're going to really want to drill into the findings we saw in the parking lots. And as you said, think about what might be influencing them. So we will look to other sources of information to help corroborate this finding. And we use Baidu, which is essentially Google's internet search engine. And we look to see what people were typing on that search engine symptoms specifically. And they started increasing in volume as of late summer. And diarrhea actually is a common symptom of COVID and is a really main symptom of many people across Wuhan who are presenting to emergency rooms.
And more generally on the topic of the pandemic, at least 20 states have seen a spike in COVID-19 cases as places start to reopen and thousands of people are gathering together at these protests. Do you expect that cases will continue to rise over the coming days and weeks? And also, what's your advice to anyone who may have protested in terms of COVID?
Yeah, listen, we're dealing with two important public health crises at the same time. And so as a public health professional, as a citizen, you have to encourage people to use their right to protest. At the same time, we want to encourage safe protesting, right? Mask wearing, social distancing where you can. And the expectation is as reopening, as people start mixing, regardless of the activities, we're going to start seeing rises in infection. We've been seeing that already. The result of Memorial Day weekend, we're already seeing increases in many states. And as people start to really congregate again as the summer activities, we're going to see spikes of cases. Now, how far that will go, we'll have to see. Clearly, we're still, as epidemiologists, expecting another big wave of infection.
The Department of Health and Human Services announced just today that the U.S. supply of remdesivir will be completely exhausted by the end of this month. How big of a concern is that for people who are being treated for coronavirus or using the drug to treat other conditions?
Right. Clearly we have stockpile issues. That is one antiviral that people are counting on. But, clearly, that isn't either a silver bullet either. We are still wanting that vaccine. We're still months off. And so the best sort of advice that we can give is to try to reduce transmission. And as tiring as that is, to encourage mask wearing and social distancing. places that are seeing active transmission, they still have the opportunity to generate, cases that ultimately lead to deaths. And so the best thing now is to encourage people to try to prevent transmission that ultimately reduces your need for these antivirals in the first place.
Dr. John Brownstein, thank you so much for your insight as always.
Thank you, Lindsay.
And when we come back, canceled, we'll take a look at the fallout and backlash for some who've weighed in on the recent protest. After Cristobal, town's just beginning the cleanup after the deluge from that tropical system.
The Americans here on the ground and the Iraqis, 18,000 tons. Batatas. Ismail? David.
Over ground zero from Hurricane Michael.
You can see just home after home.
David, nice to meet you.
This was your view.
My favorite view.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Welcome back. Along with the many citizens who have been using their voices for change, there are also companies and other business entities who have made attempts to address the rising tide of social change, but may have missed the mark. Is it genuine or just lip service? Our Trevor Ault has more.
CrossFit DC owner Tom Brose has drawn a line, both literally and figuratively, for what his gym stands for. Atop a statement he posted Sunday on Instagram, CrossFit is crossed out.
It's just not the values that I want to align with.
The message comes in response to a tweet from CrossFit CEO Greg Glassman. Replying to a health organization calling racism a public health issue, he wrote, "It's Floyd-19. Glassman has since apologized, but the damage is done, and more than 400 affiliates, including CrossFit DC, have now dropped their CrossFit partnerships.
It's a really easy decision for us to do this and a really heartbreaking one as well. And I think that there's a lot of people across the country in that same boat.
Glassman is one of several people who have been met with swift rebukes for making comments that don't align with the Black Lives Matter movement. Many call it justice, others call it karma, but some, like Ivanka Trump, may consider it a part of cancel culture. The president's daughter invoked that term after a Kansas college canceled her scheduled commencement speech in the wake of ongoing protests. She called the decision viewpoint discrimination. NFL superstar Drew Brees also found himself in the ire of the public and his own teammates after he said about other players kneeling during the national anthem.
I will never agree with anybody disrespecting the flag of the United States of America.
Brees' wife says they received death threats after that interview. The quarterback has since apologized repeatedly and committed to standing in support of Black Americans. Even in media, the head of the New York Times editorial board has resigned after the paper ran an opinion piece calling for American troops to respond to ongoing demonstrations. And the top editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer left his post over the weekend, days after running the headline, "Buildings Matter Too." But beyond condemning statements of opposition, a frequent refrain of protesters is the famous quote from Desmond Tutu: "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor."
No matter how big or small your platform is, you need to use your voice.
And that push for allyship extends beyond individuals. Massive corporations are now making statements and taking action. Ice cream company Ben & Jerry's has been a vocal supporter of Black Lives Matter. Lego is pulling advertising for police toys and donating $4 million to organizations supporting racial equality. But other attempts at corporate advocacy have rung hollow, seen by some as head-scratching or hypocritical, like the Washington Redskins participating in Blackout Tuesday despite cries the team's own name is racist. The message from the movement is clear, but it's also nuanced.
If I go into a certain store, I'm looked at, I'm automatically assumed of someone that's going to shoplift.
If you're silent, you're complicit, but if you want to actually help, it takes more than just talk. For ABC News Live, I'm Trevor Ault.
Our thanks to Trevor. And still ahead on ABC News Prime, we travel to the epicenter of COVID-19, Brazil. What life is like in the favelas and why some say they have to rely on gangs instead of their own government. And following the money, we drill down on police spending in America. But first, our tweet of the day. Take a look at this. What goes down must get back up again. Democratic leaders getting a little help back up after kneeling to honor George Floyd this morning.
In times like these, the news-making events happen here. ABC News.
President Trump meeting face-to-face with one of the world's most brutal dictators, Kim Jong-un.
The president.
Do you trust him? I do trust him, yeah. I think he trusts me, and I trust him.
Ivanka Trump.
I have to ask you about your emails. Your father had taken Hillary Clinton to task for this.
There just is no equivalency.
So the idea of lock her up doesn't apply to you?
No.
Comey.
How strange is it for you to sit here and compare the president to a mob boss?
Very strange. Michelle Obama.
What do you wish you could tell your pre-White House self?
Whew. Melania Trump.
Do you think there's still people there that he can't trust?
Yes.
Still working now?
Yes.
Michael Cohen.
So he's still lying?
Yes.
It's a big statement.
And now, in a year with so much on the line, we're right there.
Good evening tonight from Washington, a very busy news night.
America's #1 news source, ABC News, straightforward.
We all need someone who'll pull no punches and give it to us straight. No bull, no spin. Now imagine getting your news like that. Just give it to me straight. ABC News, straightforward.
Another week in America, a country facing a new test now.
The Wuhan airport, almost no one here.
The last flight out of Rome.
This is the nursing home just outside Seattle.
Dozens of people were just rushed off this cruise ship.
This is ground zero.
It is shut down.
Another ambulance just pulled out.
Now they're headed to the hospital.
Time is of the essence.
You can see the ship behind me.
This is the first time tests have been done here.
Morning, afternoon, evening, late night, 24/7. ABC News, there for you.
What's the most innovative daily news podcast out there to listen to every day? Well, the Edward R. Murrow Awards say it's Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. Even the New York Times calls us a top news podcast worth listening to. Start Here, free on Apple Podcasts.
And welcome back. With mounting calls by some activists to defund or downsize police departments, we take a closer look at just how much American taxpayers are spending on the police by the numbers. Nationwide, state and local governments spend on average 4% of their total budgets on police, according to the 2017 census data analyzed by the Urban Institute. It's higher for cities, which spend on average 13% of their budgets on policing. Los Angeles spends nearly a quarter, 23% of its budget on its police force. That ratio is especially high in part because school spending comes from a separate budget. New York City, by contrast, spends only 6% of its budget on police. The U.S. spent a total of $115 billion on state and local policing in 2017. That's nearly 3 times the police spending from 4 decades ago, adjusted for inflation. Now, even though Americans now pay substantially more for their police departments than they did in the past, police budgets as a percent of total state and local budgets have remained remarkably steady over the last 40 years. Experts say that could be because other costs like state health care and education have also risen. And still to come, the formal request and the pushback from Prince Andrew's legal team. Will he cooperate in the Jeffrey Epstein sex trafficking investigation? Distrust in the streets, the lack of faith in government, and even the death toll count as COVID-19 rages in Brazil. And the $1 million discovery inside a treasure chest. But first, here are some of the trending stories on abcnews.com.
What you're seeing right now, this is part of the eye wall.
This procession of migrants goes back 2 miles.
There is going to be catastrophic damage.
This fire has made a run. You can see those flames shooting up into the sky.
We are on the jam-packed red carpet.
To the right, guys.
So this is the 4th weekend of protest.
Watch ABC News on location for Facebook Watch.
What's the most innovative daily news podcast out there to listen to every day? Well, the Edward R. Murrow Awards say it's Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. Even the New York Times calls us a top news podcast worth listening to. So if you like getting behind the biggest news stories of the day, inside all the details, the backstory, and what will happen next, then listen to Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. It's like no other news podcast out there. Even the critics agree. Listen free on Apple Podcasts.
The Americans here on the ground and the Iraqis, 18,000 tons. Patatas.
Ismail?
David.
For ground zero from Hurricane Michael.
You can see just home after home.
David, nice to meet you.
This was your view.
My favorite view.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Today, a hometown homegoing for George Floyd. The memorial line snaking out the door and around the front lawn. People paying their final respects. Around the country, his killing continues to resonate, sparking a movement for change that grows louder every day. In Washington, D.C., House Democrats took a knee for nearly 9 minutes before introducing a new legislation called the Justice in Policing Act. In New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio vowing to cut funds for the NYPD and use that money for social programs. These protesters saying they want that money to go to housing support, health care, and essential services instead.
I'm not here just to criticize the mayor. That's easy. I'm coming from a place of deep respect to say we expect better.
In Minneapolis, the fired officer Derek Chauvin, shown on video with his knee pinned to Floyd's neck, appeared in court via video. He is facing murder and manslaughter charges. Unconditional bail was set at $1.25 million or $1 million with conditions. After 100 days of sacrifice to flatten the curve, New York City has now taken its first steps toward reopening.
Been waiting 3 months to take a train, and I actually feel safe.
Today, manufacturing, construction, jobs were cleared to bring their employees back to work. The first of many cautious steps ahead.
We got to stick to it so we can get to the next phase and the next phase and the next phase.
But after 16,000 New Yorkers died from coronavirus, concern is mounting about a potential surge from massive crowds at ongoing protests. 20 states and Puerto Rico are reporting an increasing number of confirmed cases, but the push to reopen continues to grow, not just in the U.S., but around the world.
Federal prosecutors in the U.S. have now formally requested testimony from Britain's Prince Andrew. It's part of the investigation into alleged co-conspirators of Jeffrey Epstein, who died by suicide almost a year ago in a federal prison.
Remnants of Cristobal pushing inland from the Gulf, major flooding along the coast in Mandeville, Louisiana. Rescuers in rough water pulling people from their homes. Flood warnings and watches in effect from Louisiana to Wisconsin over the next 24 to 48 hours.
A famed treasure discovered. $1 million worth of buried treasure being hunted for a decade, now found in the Rocky Mountain wilderness. The bronze chest believed to be filled with gold coins, jewelry, and other valuables. That coveted prize sought after since 2010. At least 4 people died trying to find it. The chest, buried by New Mexico author and antiques dealer Forrest Fenn. The only clues hidden in a 24-line poem from his 2010 autobiography, The Thrill of the Chase.
Welcome back. And now to the hate crime investigation now underway after the self-proclaimed president of the Virginia KKK allegedly drove his truck into a crowd of protesters. Kira Phillips has this report.
Tonight, video emerging of Seattle protesters sent running for cover after this driver plows through a crowd of peaceful demonstrators. Police reviewing this video say one protester trying to stop him was shot by the driver before he got out of his car. Brandishing his weapon, the gunman then blends into the crowd, but police arresting him moments later. His motive tonight, unknown. The 27-year-old who was shot, now recovering. Just hours earlier in Richmond, Virginia, 36-year-old Harry Rogers arrested by police after allegedly revving his engine, then ramming his car into a group of protesters. He's been charged with assault and battery. The prosecuting attorney comparing it to the deadly tactics in Charlottesville, Virginia 3 years ago that killed Heather Heyer, an anti-racism protester. Tonight, authorities in Virginia considering charging Rogers with hate crimes after they say he admitted to being a local Ku Klux Klan leader.
Our thanks to Kira for that. With infections of COVID-19 soaring inside Brazil, its president, who has been heavily criticized for his handling of the pandemic, has come up with another curious response. The government has now stopped reporting the cumulative death toll of the virus. Distrust there is now growing even more, particularly for those living in the favelas or the slums of Brazil's biggest cities. They say that they have been abandoned and that gangs have stepped in to fill the void with so many in need. For the last week, our James Longman has been reporting across Brazil, a nation with more COVID cases than every other nation with the exception of the United States. Tonight, he takes a look at how its cities are coping.
In the favelas of Sao Paulo, death is always close. But coronavirus is a different kind of killer, and it's spreading fast.
This is one of the poorest parts of this particular favela. Bom dia.
60 people live in this small compound. Cooking, washing, cleaning, everything is shared. A life of survival.
The watchwords of coronavirus have been social distancing, wash your hands, stay clean. In this world, it's basically impossible to do that. And they're doing what they can.
Amanda is 21 years old, and she's a new mother.
Well, how old is Elena?
1 month.
1 month? Wow.
It's bad, really bad. I can't go anywhere. It's not a good life at the moment. I'm afraid my daughter will contract the virus.
I wish this wasn't coronavirus because she looks so cute. I want to touch her face.
It's a difficult life, now made even harder.
Can I ask how many people here lost their jobs as a result of coronavirus? Wow. That's basically every adult here without an income. There's only one lady, actually, who's still kept her job.
Latin America is now the epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic. Brazil's infections are rocketing, particularly among the poor. The country's had more than 500,000 reported cases, and the state of Sao Paulo, where over 1.5 million people live in these favelas, has been hit the hardest, with nearly 150,000 infections. But the reality may be much worse than what's being reported. President Jair Bolsonaro's government has limited the amount of information released to the public for the country's COVID-19 infections and deaths. Amanda does what she can to protect herself, but as ever for people who live this life, she's powerless.
Small children don't know how to deal with this. It's terrible. You try to remember to keep washing your hands, but sometimes you forget and you don't want to touch your baby. I don't know even why the government exists. They never do anything for anyone, and they never have.
The distrust between the government and the poor here runs deep. Those living in the favelas often turn to gangs. Many claim they're the only ones people can count on to get essential supplies and food. The gang that controls these streets gave us special access to their alternative state. It's called First Command of the Capital, PCC for short, and it's one of Brazil's largest and most lethal networks of organized crime. Marcelo, not his real name, runs the drug supply in a small section of this favela. This is a world not many get to see.
Business has been good. People always need drugs. It's an addiction. There's a strict hierarchy here. The bosses give orders from jail, and it comes down to me. People here get no help from the government. They need us. We are worried about coronavirus spreading.
They've issued rules to the community on how they must keep safe. I ask what happens if people break them.
I don't have the authority to tell you that.
This community centre provides some support.
I just want to show you in here, this is the kind of stuff that's being donated. These packs are waiting to go out, and in each one, people are given bleach, they're given antiseptic wash, soaps. You know, this just is the kind of stuff that people don't have the money to buy themselves, and it's all being donated by this organisation.
Locals tell us these groups work with the support of the gang that runs this favela.
The government is not helping people here, and that's where these gangs have filled the gap.
Benedicta lost her job. For 13 hours a day, she now makes masks that earn her around 20 cents a piece. The community centre distributes them.
All of these masks are distributed for free inside this community. We deliver masks every day. A lot of people don't want to wear the mask. You have people who listen to the government. President Bolsonaro said this was a little flu or media hysteria. A lot of people listen to this.
Showman President Bolsonaro has not taken the outbreak seriously, rarely appearing with a mask. We saw firsthand the anger from the young, the marginalized, protesters breaking out onto the streets, demonstrating against him, his authoritarian style, and his approach to the pandemic.
So we're just behind the police line here. They're trying to move forward to push protesters back. There's a lot of smoke and tear gas in the air.
All this is affecting the medical response.
The huge problem for us is this political and economical discussion and not seeing just the health situation. So we, as a healthcare worker, we know what you have to do, but our politicians are not involved. The population hear from our president, you can go out, you can go to the street, you have to work. And hear from the São Paulo government, no, you have to stay home, it's not time to go out.
So there's been a lot of mixed messaging.
So it's very confusing for the population.
A confused message for communities that need clarity the most.
The huge problem for us is the density of people that you have in these places. We don't have a space. Everyone lives together. We have one room for 7, 8 people, and people don't believe on the disease. People are used to violence. People are used to death. It's very sad for us to say something like that, but it's true. The problem for them is to earn some money to give food for their family. It's not to be infected.
Across town, the other Sao Paulo, the antithesis of what we've seen in the favelas. Modern residential buildings. People are whiter, wealthier in this part of town. But the same disease is spreading. Rosalie lost her mother, brother and uncle in the space of just 1 month. The family here were terrified of going to the hospital. Brazil's pandemic has spread badly among nurses. In fact, COVID has killed more nurses in Brazil than anywhere else.
Santa Maria, Mãe de Deus.
She prays for them every day, and she feels guilty.
Ela não queria ter ido pro hospital.
My mother didn't want to go to the hospital. She was afraid she'd die like my uncle. She didn't want to be intubated. It was my brother who told me. He said to me, "Rosie, Mom just died." I said, "No, I don't believe you." It felt like the ground opened under my feet.
The economic impact on this city has been devastating. Downtown Sao Paulo now a dystopian vision of poverty. Patrick had a job as a security guard, but now he lines up with the homeless and drug addicted to get food. Look at his eyes. You can see the anger.
I feel humiliated to have come here. Before we had a good government, they were helping and supporting people, but now it feels like this government is against us.
In this divided city, it's only at the Formosa Cemetery where rich and poor unite. Vultures welcome the dead. Hundreds are being buried here every day. The Raciano family is here for Josemar, who died just the day before. He was 50.
It's a strange contrast. Men in PPE, and then these very elaborate flowers for each grave. Each of these funerals can only last a few minutes before the family is moved away.
His wife is unconsolable. Brother-in-law Georgie agrees to speak to us.
It's so difficult to find the words. He had a huge heart. He was a son, a father, a grandfather, a husband. He was a sensational person.
This is one family among hundreds. They arrive one after the other for their quick goodbyes. And there may be a lot more to come.
We are in the peak, and we are going to stay in the peak. It's not going to decrease in the next weeks. I think we are still around 1,000 deaths per day in our country. It's a huge number, huge numbers.
Brazil has already suffered so much, and now it's preparing for worse.
James Longman, ABC News, Sao Paulo.
Chilling images right there. Our thanks to James. And when we return, protesters of all walks of life, all races and ages, some too young to know the meaning of the word injustice, but they are protesting against it nonetheless. Coming up, a look at some of the youngest social activists already raising their voices to be heard.
Right now, how do you make sense of it all? Now, afternoons on ABC, one place with the good information you need.
We are all in this together, and we're going to get through this together.
Pandemic, what you need to know. Afternoons at 1 Eastern, 12 Central and Pacific on ABC. Friday nights, 9, 8 Central. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt, True Crime, 2020. Friday nights, 9, 8 Central on ABC.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live, the 24/7 streaming news source from ABC News. Breaking news, live events, streaming nonstop. Original breakthrough storytelling from ABC News, National Geographic, ESPN, and it's all designed differently for you to stream straight to any screen whenever you want.
ABC News Live.
Streaming everywhere, right to you. ABC News Live. It's that easy to go there.
Now, with so much on the line, ABC News, America's #1 news, is right there for you live on Hulu with stories of strength, stories of hope. Because now, when it matters most,
Hulu has live news.
Hulu has live news.
Hulu has live news, and that news is ABC News.
ABC News Live on Hulu.
ABC News Live on Hulu.
Watch the news you need.
Thanks so much for streaming with us.
Streaming to all Hulu subscribers right now.
You likely remember those high heels, the spiky hair, and the polka dots. Well, Bonnie Pointer, a founding member of the pop group The Pointer Sisters, who turned out massive hits in the 70s and 80s. She has passed away. Bonnie sang on early hits, earning a Grammy, but then left the group she helped found before some of their biggest hits like I'm So Excited, Automatic, and Neutron Dance in order to pursue a solo career. Her sister Anita and fellow Pointer Sisters singer said in a statement today, Bonnie was my best friend and we talked every day. We never had a fight in our life. I already miss her, and I will see her again one day. Patricia Bonnie Pointer was 69 years old. A major record label has decided to drop the use of the term urban. Republic Records, whose artists include The Weeknd, Ariana Grande, and Post Malone, announced that it's doing away with the word urban in describing departments, employee titles, and music genres, citing the term as an antiquated generalization that marginalizes music by black artists. The label is encouraging others within the music industry to follow suit. As parents, it can be difficult to know what to tell young children about the scenes that are playing out on TV in the streets around the world. But some are using this as a teachable moment and suggest if they're old enough to formulate the question, they are old enough for the answer. And so they march. Their age is no measure for their passion.
No justice, no peace.
Tiny fists, brandishing poster boards, hoisting signs over their heads about matters that would otherwise be over their heads, except their parents have decided the time is now. Social activists at 6 or 76, bearing witness to the struggle, has no age limit. Toddlers among the crowds on the front lines of this confrontation of injustice. Even before many know the meaning of racism or equality, kids like 9-year-old Aubrey Johnson in Ohio know right from wrong.
If I get it, you should get it.
Out of the mouths of babes, with a bullhorn no less, teaching a much-needed lesson to many adults.
It is very wrong to kill black people.
Sometimes it's the littlest voices that pack the biggest punch.
No justice, no peace.
Many are now taking note of the mini-marchers, like 7-year-old Winta Amor, bearing her heart and soul into protest along the streets of Long Island, New York.
What's his name? Say his name.
The mother of 7-year-old Aiden told him he could draw anything he wanted on his poster to bring with him to a protest in California. He chose to write, "Don't shoot me."
Aiden, what does your poster say?
Don't shoot me.
But it's not just the youngest among us taking to the streets. In many cities, the call to action is from today's teens, tomorrow's leaders. Not even old enough to vote yet, many young people are letting their voices be heard outside of a ballot box, demanding justice now.
We care, our lives matter. We're tired of this. We're tired of fighting. We're tired of police brutality. Like, it's time to change the narrative.
It's our future, and we have to fight for it.
We want to show them our faces, show them that we're peacefully protesting, so they can understand where we come from.
Whether these are baby steps or giant leaps, they march on in the hopes of making a difference.
We need to go out and vote and make change and change this country.
The first step is acknowledging that we have a problem. Well, what's the second step?
Kids who should be too young to sing the blues, expressing themselves in song, hoping to unite and inspire change.
I just wanna live. I just wanna live.
And a child shall lead them. Before we go tonight, our image of the day, reunited, a 6-year-old in Barcelona hugging one of her teachers on the first day back to school after the lockdown ended in Spain. That is our show for this hour. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis. We'll be right back here again at 9 o'clock. Thanks so much for streaming with us, and have a good night.